Hi there. Welcome to the Business of Success, the podcast where growth isn't just a buzzword and success is anything but accidental. I'm your host, Parul, award-winning CS leader and best-selling author, and I'm here to talk about what actually drives sustainable business: customer value, leadership, talent, community, and the systems behind companies that really, truly last. In each episode, I sit down with founders, operators, thinkers, and builders who are building success from the inside out. We go beyond the headlines and beyond the hype to unpack the real decisions, trade-offs, and frameworks that turn value into retention, growth, and impact. Because success isn't just about scaling faster, it's about building smarter. And if you're ready for honest conversations, practical insights, and a bit of a more human way to grow your business, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Business of Success. I'm your host, Parul. I'm very excited today to talk to someone who I've connected with on multiple levels and have had a chance to get to know a little bit over the last couple of months. And I'm excited to share his story, but also the story of probably many people in the world today. Mike Lemon, thank you for joining me. And Mike is a customer value and revenue driver. He has worked across many roles in many organizations and is in the same space that I play in: customer experience, customer revenue. And so we found a lot of common ground there. But Mike, welcome. And I'd love for you to share a bit about yourself and your journey and what brings you here today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I've enjoyed getting to know you. It's nice to connect with someone who shares the same sort of values on value and how you make customers successful and in turn make everyone around you successful, including yourself. So happy to be here. Yeah, my whole career has been rooted in customer success / account management / growth. I started out actually on the advertising agency side of the business, so running large customers who were hiring us to essentially develop marketing materials to go out into the market and help drive their growth. So I've sort of had rooted in me that you're only as good as your last act with a customer, and pretty much meaning you've got to be constantly showing them that the investment they're making in the organization you're representing is delivering value back to them. But then I did that for a long time and sort of saw the industry changing around me and wanted to get closer to technology and digital. The sort of name shifts a lot, but really was rooted in a lot of traditional above the line, as they called it, advertising and marketing, and really wanted to get to more of the below the line and digital and where we are today. So the last probably 10 years actually was in consulting for a while, working with companies on driving their digital strategy. And then I just went to work directly for some of the larger technology companies. So I was with Oracle for a while, Adobe for a while, and now I work for another large global technology company. Making
the rounds, but also continuing to kind of drive the word of value, which is what I love to hear, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you and I connected, and kind of the title of this episode is all about value, but I titled it in a funny way: The Unexpected Value and Experience, because you and I actually connected on a mutual article that you had written one and I had written one, unknown to each other, about how we're seeing some shifts, some fundamental shifts in society. I've actually talked about this on another episode where women are actually choosing roles outside of leadership, very experienced people choosing roles outside of leadership to continue to deliver value for customers, but actually maybe elevate customer experiences. And surprisingly, you did the same. You had the same kind of inclination and wrote about it. Let's talk about it a bit. So, we're seeing many experienced professionals, people with long careers, stepping out of leadership, actually intentionally doing that. Tell us about your experience there, and tell us about what drove you to also share your story.
Yeah, actually, this started for me a long time ago. A good 15 years ago, and actually even before that. And the story was basically about 15 years ago, I was in a pretty senior level position. Someone had joined my team and he looked familiar, and we started talking, and I realized, oh my gosh, I used to work for you when I first started my career. And it was interesting because now I was his boss, and I questioned him, why are you doing this? I saw you as somebody very senior. And he said, I remember specifically, Mike, I'm going to explain to you why, but you're probably going to realize it yourself someday. And we developed this great relationship, and I learned a lot from him and realized the importance of it's really, there's so much that can be gained from tapping into people who've had the job before you and a lot longer than you. And I learned how to manage somebody at that level. And sort of he knew my weaknesses and probably knew that he was a much better, more experienced leader and manager than I was, but was very respectful of where I was in my career. And so I think in turn I realized, well, I'm going to respect his experience, and we had this mutual understanding of how to work together. And I think it worked out quite well. And then I found myself in that similar position as I got further along in my career. I had very senior positions. I had a lot of responsibility, and then reached a point where I thought, you know what? Let me just go do what I'm really good at, which is driving customer value, driving growth, and maybe let somebody else take on all that responsibility that comes with that, and I'll help deliver results faster. And so that's when I just made the decision to let me forego the leadership role for now. And then I took that experience that I had 15 years ago, and that's what led me into the article. I've learned a lot from it. I've learned it's not for everyone, and it's kind of a mutual, has to be mutual respect in order to make it work. You know, the employee has to sort of readjust their expectations because you're not in that leadership position anymore. And then where it really works is in the person who brings you in basically knows that they need to treat you a little bit differently, because you're probably not going to respond well to feedback that someone else at your title level may want or may need or may get. So then I just decided to write about it because I wanted other people to experience it can be great. There's some sort of rules of the road and guardrails in place, and that's what led me to the article. I interviewed a bunch of people, and then I think that's how you and I found each other, through a connection, because my article I think made the rounds and people liked it, and then you and I were connected.
Yes. No, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. And I think for the audience, hopefully we can get into some of this, but I also went through it. First, having a peer step out of leadership during the time when she was very busy as a new mom. And I think she said, you know what? I love the work I'm doing. I just don't want to have to take on more than I can actually handle right now. And she chose to step down. And then I did it recently. I hired someone very, very experienced into a role that was a, IC individual contributor. And I think the first thing is stigma, right? We have to remove the stigma here because number one, people can make choices in their career and go any which way. They can go sideways, they can go up, they can go down, right? But we have to remove the stigma. And I think one of the areas that there is a stigma that exists is recruitment, right? Companies will see, and I had someone tell me this. I applied to actually in between before starting my consulting company, I applied to a role at a large tech company similar to where you work. And I applied for an IC role. I got the interview, and the manager's like, I think you're too experienced for this role. And I was like, I'm here. I'm here, right? I'm ready to do this. So let's talk about recruitment. What challenges have you seen? And then what are ways that you think that maybe hiring managers or companies could learn from this?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up starting with recruitment because, and I actually, before we start there, I'd start the first thing, if someone decides to go down this path, you sort of have to start with you need to know what you're going to be walking into. And the first thing is recruitment. And more than likely, you're going to be screened by somebody significantly less experienced than you that doesn't even understand the concept of later in your career wanting to shift from a leadership role to an IC, because when you're earlier in your career, all you think about is having that most senior position and the theoretical corner office and all the perks that come with it. Really, it has to start with knowing what you're stepping into. And then, part of it is asking the right questions up front and making sure the organization is ready for something like this. And there are going to be people that understand that you don't just need a job, because I had those questions asked from me, or questions like, well, how do we know you're not just going to leave? This isn't a placeholder job. And so you need to be ready with the sort of objection handling, if you will. You're going to be met with the objections right up front, because there are people who just don't get it. So I'd advise people to first be ready and be confident in what you're doing, and whether it is because you want to spend more time at home, or whether it's because, and you can be honest, I don't want to be involved in the politics like I was before, or it's I just really enjoy doing X, and the more senior I got away from that. So I'd be ready with some really smart answers. I would also be ready for the questions that don't seem so smart, that can maybe seem a little theoretically beneath you, or questioning what you're doing and why you're doing it. And then from there, I noticed that once you started having really honest conversations and you got to pretty much past the gatekeepers and into hiring managers, you could be really honest. And That's where I think an experienced leader really shines, because then you're sort of driving the conversation and you're probably asking questions that need to be asked that maybe that manager isn't asking, or that leader. And you're sort of setting up for, I'm doing this for this reason, therefore I'm not going to be a threat. And I'm probably going to be able to help you at a level that someone else you might be looking at won't be able to help you. But also I can guarantee you, I'm not going to also be looking at how do I get your job, because I had your job and I don't want your job. That's why I'm here. So I'd say honesty too. And then I'd also say maybe the third thing is, if you're sensing this is not going to work, that someone is going to be threatened by you and they're going to limit how you operate, it probably isn't the right thing. And you can sniff that out. Your years of experience will sort of give you some red flags of like, oh, maybe it's not me who's going to leave. They may leave me in a few months because they're going to feel threatened by me.
Well, I love this. So before we go into what companies can do, because I think what you just unpacked is so important for the job seeker. Yeah. And I really think what you shared is amazing. I'm like taking notes literally, because here's the truth. We prepare for interviews in a lot of ways. We maybe don't think to prepare for interviews with these caveats, especially if you're an experienced hire coming into a role. Somebody might feel threatened. You might be worried about their job. Hey, let me just quell your fears in the beginning. Yeah. I am coming into this interview prepared. So for those job seekers, come prepared, right? Yeah. Prepare for this mentally and with your scripts, right? Yeah. And then now let's shift a little. So you have been there. We've been there. I've been there, right? We've been in that hiring manager's position. I will tell you, I looked at a resume recently and I had a lens of concern when I saw experienced hire. To be frank, I came back to that resume later because it was so good and there was so much value in it, and we did actually hire. But I had, my first inclination was a little bit of pause, right? What can companies do? What are tactics that you in your experience have seen, or maybe just like learned through this process that could be, help to advise them?
Yeah, I think I think a company should just first accept that not everybody with experience is going to want and demand and command a salary or a compensation package. That a lot of people have gotten to a point where they want to continue working and they're not ready to retire. And so I would get rid of the assumption that they're going to be expensive, number one, and shift that thinking to a different line item of what the experience they're going to bring. And it has to start everywhere from recruiting all the way through hiring managers and then senior leadership. And when you really start thinking at that level, and a company starts thinking of you're paying $5 for $10 worth of experience, it doesn't mean you're getting discount. It actually means you're making really smart strategic decisions on how you hire and how you spend your money, because you're getting so much more out of that person. That'd be number one. Just we're going to start looking for people, and we recognize there are people out there, and these aren't people who need a job. They want this type of job. Then I think you have to go and then to the folks day to day, the actual managers, VP level, and actually say we're making a strategic shift. And you have to do some training. And a little bit of that is what I wrote in my article, what you wrote in your article, which is you're going to have to find the people who can actually manage at that level and not feel threatened. I actually have a friend who ascended to CEO of a very large company over the last year, and she attributes her success to making a hire of somebody a good 15 to 20 years more experience than her. And it's because she had the insight to know, like, look, I have a vision. I know where we want to go, industry really well, but what I don't know is how to do this. And so she hired somebody, but they had that conversation up front of what he needed in order to feel respected and feel like he had a purpose. And she was really clear on what she needed. And it worked. I mean, you typically don't ascend to the CEO level of quite a large company. So I think she had that sort of unique insight, which some CEOs do, but for most companies, you really need to have it's almost like a lot of large companies have, what do you call them? These different employee groups. They may have a veterans group, or they may have, a Latino group, or whatever it may be. I don't want to call it the older group, because that's not really necessarily what it is, but maybe this idea of like finding a place and then creating this culture where you're actually looking and seeking out more experienced people. I can tell you the third thing is, then it's the peers that person will work with. You almost have to let, especially at the younger, more inexperienced level, know these are your peers in title, but you need to respect their experience and you need to learn from them. There are some people who will only look at someone in this role purely based on title and treat you in a way aligned to that title. And that's where I don't always fault that person when they respond that way or react that way or behave that way. It's more, did the company train them on the value and why you want to keep those people really happy and feeling like they have a purpose?
Yeah, I love that. Well, and you just hit on so many, I think, very important things, and also things that maybe are overlooked in this process of hiring is, maybe some manager training, maybe some kind of understanding, right? And I love that example of the CEO because I actually had the chance. So I've become a fractional leader and I had the chance to sort of work alongside the leader that was hired in to the full-time role that I was in. And I think it was great. It was like an advisory role, right? And true advisory, like, yeah, you call it, I'm an advisor, but no, it was truly like advising. And that the benefit of that, hearing the story of the CEO, the benefit of that they gained and the trajectory that their career probably took by having an experienced person to not only just get advice from, but lean on in tough times, ask questions to navigate decision making, right? Honestly, many companies may not have thought of this role. There could be more roles like it out there,
right,
that are, really there to help leaders make better decisions. And it's so interesting because I love all the different perspectives that you shared on different hires. There's another bit that you and I talked about before when we met, which was like the work that you're doing now is more of a strategic customer success role, right? There are different customers that in our field of customer success, we need somebody that can be a partner to them, truly a strategic partner in thought, in understanding their metrics, in driving their business. And that's the only way they're going to succeed. The value of experience can create amazing strategic customer partnerships. So aside from our executives and our team members, you can actually build better customer partnerships. So do you want to speak a little bit about your experience in that?
Yeah. I think that's where you're really hitting on the key value back for a company is when you are managing client relationships. What you get out of doing the job for a long time and having those sort of battle scars, if you will. I mean, I often say there's nothing that surprises me or shocks me anymore. I may not like a situation, but I can certainly now go back and draw on, okay, I've been here before. Here's how we need to manage it. Where that is the value you're going to get out of somebody more experienced stepping into that IC role, because most ICs and most inexperienced ICs don't have the runway before them. So that's number one when there's sort of troubleshooting and there's a problem. But I actually get a lot of positive feedback from clients that I work with because they're like, you're thinking at a much different level than perhaps your predecessor or other people that we may see in this role. And they're seeing the value and giving the feedback back to my leadership. And I hear this from other people who are doing the same thing that I'm doing, which is, wow, this was really, we understand this was a smart hire that you brought to us, because then I'm bringing experience from another client perhaps that was in a similar situation that may not yield any sort of value that they're getting out of a current event or a sale. But I'm like, I had a client that this happened to years ago. Have you thought about this? I would say the last piece on that too is with experience comes connections. And I actually just had coffee with sort of a newer contact friend of mine yesterday who's president of quite a large company. We met at an event a few months ago. And I was surprised myself as she was sharing some of her challenges that she has. I was lining up people that I wanted to introduce her to that are having similar challenges and are thinking about their business in a certain way. You're probably not going to get that from someone fresh out of their career, but you make a lot of friends, you make a lot of contacts, you keep in touch with people. That's something that I even underestimated, quite frankly, when I wrote the article. It's the value of these, long-standing connections and relationships that you can share, in this role now. Again, for me, it's second nature, but I've had more people say, like, how do you know this person? And I'm like, well, actually, we were junior together 25 years ago, and now they're COO of X company. So that's a lot of the value you can bring to that role as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think you've hit a lot of kind of important points, but also like the value of those relationships. It's so funny. I always thought whenever I was a leader, I kind of felt like sometimes you just wanted to go and do the job, somebody was struggling and you're like, I could just do this better. But you knew you shouldn't
Right.
because A, you don't have the time for it. And B,
Right.
you should delegate and learn how to delegate. The value of a leader stepping into an IC role is that exact answer, right?
Yes.
You're able to achieve the thing that is impossible for the leader to do,
Yes.
to actually be that experienced person. And I mean, that is something that I think is really, really cool to think about the potential for, right? And not to say, and this is not to discredit, we don't want to say like never hire an entry level, because I think there's a ton of value in that too. And I think in customer success, sadly, we're seeing less fresh people being hired, less people into training roles. So there's a whole different issue there.
Yeah.
But this kind of solves that need, right? That niche that the leader can't do themselves.
Right.
So if you are a leader going out there and hiring, consider, how this could help you, how these could be truly assets to your team. And it's funny, Mike, because I think I used to think it was impossible to find. I felt like that would be like a unicorn person, right? Someone with 10 to 15 years of experience that wants to be an IC and get paid X number of dollars that's okay with this salary. And I remember I advised a company years ago and I said, that's impossible. You're never going to find that.
Yeah.
But I think times are changing, right? And so maybe I was wrong. And I'm okay to feel wrong, because I think this is an important path for companies to consider, but also an important path for leaders.
Well, I think so too. And there are tons and tons of people out there. And part of it, they may not even know that they want this role. So part of it is just going into your network of people. I think I mentioned that movie with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway, which I loved. And it was, kind of took it to a little bit more of an extreme. I think it was an elder program, which I was like, I don't know if he was that old at the time, but the idea of it was really sound. But again, there may be people who don't know that they would want to do this. So if you're in a leadership position and you're trying to solve problems, grow your business, you may have to tap people on the shoulder and say, would you consider this? And then you sort of lay out the benefits of, as a leader, I'm going to take on all this. What I want is your experience level. There are a lot of people who it's very appealing to just, again, do what they're really good at and what they enjoy, and let somebody else take care of a lot of the bureaucratic work that comes with being in a leadership role. So there's a lot of people out there who want to do this.
Yes. So if you're one of those people out there, take heed from Mike's lessons on how to prepare for those interviews to make sure you're hitting all the areas of potential concern or the blocks that you might hit. And then if you're a company, be open, right? And be willing to learn how to work together, because there's a ton of value. I want to shift a little, just because your work is about value realization and driving revenue. Let's talk a little bit about what are the key sort of things that you have picked up over the years that we could impart some of your knowledge to this audience, right? On what are some of the ways that you're seeing, the best sort of value drivers for business today, but also the world has changed drastically in the last 2 years, right? So have you seen some of these value drivers shift? Any kind of nuance happening with AI? Would be curious.
Yeah, I'll start with kind of my philosophy, and then we'll get into sort of the back half of your question. But I'm a big fan of don't reinvent the wheel, and make value and how to measure value more too complicated. I always try and think of it, at the end of the day, we're all buyers, we're all consumers, whether it's in our personal lives or at work. And I was telling, as a matter of fact, at this coffee I had yesterday, we were talking about value. And I said, you're going to leave this coffee shop and, think about, well, would I go back there? Did I like it? And you're going to put some measurements on, the coffee wasn't good. It was too expensive. It was too crowded. It was too loud. You could, though, if somebody said to you, give me a metric on your satisfaction with that coffee shop, you could come up with a couple metrics. So when I say don't reinvent the wheel, don't make this too complicated. For me, managing these relationships, it really doesn't matter what I think or my peers think or my leadership thinks what value is. It's who's writing the check. So I would go back to that person and, just ask them questions around, why did you buy this product? Why did you buy this service? And you can really coach them into, okay, let's get to some metrics then and some measurements, and let's get to some timing around when we'll measure these and how we'll report out, and then what we'll do if we sort of under-deliver on a metric. It doesn't always mean it's a bad thing. It just means it's a pathway into solving a problem. Or it's alerting to everybody to, we're not happy. We've decided on ranking X value of, 10, and you're only coming in at a 5, and then at least you're having real conversations in maybe not the right product, maybe not the right service, maybe it's not the right people. it just allows you then, if you don't do this and make it more complicated, to kind of get to some measurements, to make some assessments of where you are. When it comes to AI, it's sort of the same philosophy. I think there's a lot of confusion and concern right now around AI, and there was a bit of an over-indexing in the beginning of AI would do everything and replace people, and it's not really the case at all. I think it's more, you've got to decide, especially when it comes to value, if you're using agents, like what outcome do you want from that agent? If you think about agents fitting on an org chart, like sitting next to employees. And so what expectation, if you had to say this agent was successful, here's why. And then really that should all ladder up to whatever those agents, whatever those people, whatever they're there, whatever sort of measurement you're trying to get out of your client, and really whatever sort of measurement they're trying to get. You look at it that way. So sort of combining. So, to sum it up, I would not reinvent the wheel on this one or make it more complicated. I'd say most people, there is room at 90% of businesses and relationships to be able to find some measurements to put in place to then, take a look at how you're getting to that value.
Our brains work on so many of the same wavelengths, because I also wrote an article about managing AI agents, right? Like you have to learn how to manage them as a team member. And similarly, I also totally am in agreement on like value frameworks. Like I've created a value framework because it's so simple, right? And I love your coffee example. It made me think of my coffee this morning, because I go back to the same shop right now, but every time I go, I didn't like the coffee before, so I try a new one. So I'm still going back to the same shop. I am giving them the business, but until I hit that mark, am I going to be a repeat customer? Well, maybe not, right? Yeah. But it made me think, right? Value is in the eye of that customer. And we often take that for granted, as companies, right? So one of the things that, leaders and I think in customer success, we're very passionate about trying to drive for outcomes, right? But I work with a lot of early stage companies. They might not know what those outcomes are yet. So you work at some of the larger, more established tech companies. Yeah. Can you share just a little insight for folks that maybe are starting out on, hey, maybe I don't know exactly what to measure, right? Yeah. What does success look like down the road? Yeah. Because I think that can help to paint a picture for somebody who's trying to build something today.
Yeah, I would start very simply. Like, why are you even thinking about whatever you may be purchasing, or why you've purchased it already, whatever product or service it may be? And don't overcomplicate it. Just think it very simply, like, I needed to bring in a consultant to do X, Y, and Z. And those are your measurements very simply. I think a lot of people have inherited as they moved into new roles, or inherited decisions that were made previously. It's okay to go back and say that decision, was made by my predecessor and we don't know why, and we're going to do an assessment on, do we even need to continue doing this now? And you really align it to where the company is going or where you want to go. And so to me, it's as simple as, where are we trying to go? And do we know why we need what we need? And then how are we going to measure against that need to make sure we're getting out of whatever investment we're making?
Yeah, that's great. And if you mess it up, you can start over. I mean, the beauty is there's not necessarily a wrong answer until you give it a try and you figure out what really makes sense for your customers, right?
Exactly.
Well, this has been an incredible conversation. I think that I learned so much from you today. So thank you for sharing. And, I'm going to put your article also in the show notes so that folks can read it. But I think this is, just one part of the journey, right? And many people are on different paths and different journeys for leadership. So the message is, let's not take for granted the opportunities we have with hiring experienced hires and the value that can come from them. So any last parting notes, Mike, for our audience here?
Yeah, I would just say, again, if you're thinking about where you are in your career and you're later in your career, you are much, much, much more valuable than you may be thinking or feeling, or what the market may be telling you. It would ignore all that. There is so much that we experience that maybe doesn't show up on paper or in a resume or on a LinkedIn, that is so valuable to that leadership team. So really dig in and go back and think about those situations that you can draw from, and then figure out how to explain that in a story and how it's going to bring value if you decide to go into more of an IC/non-leadership role.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And thanks for sharing all your insights. Absolutely. And for everyone listening, we hope to see you again next time at the Business of Success. Take care. Thanks for listening to The Business of Success. If today's conversation sparked a new way of thinking about growth, value, talent, leadership, don't forget to follow along and share this episode with someone who is building something meaningful. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Customer X Success, which is helping organizations design customer value, build better and higher impact teams, and turn success into a growth strategy. You can learn more about Customer X Success at www.customerxsuccess.com. I'm Parul and this is The Business of Success, where success is built, not just chased. Until next time, see you soon.